Hello everybody, and welcome to Noob-Splaining. My name is Wolf. If this is your first time here, this is where I noob-splain the crazy, over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000, to such an extent you realise how much of a nerd I actually am. So if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, drop a comment on your favourite part, and if you want a shout out or have a request for a video, just email me on the email address in the description, or ask me in the comments. This week's shoutout is for yet another lore tuber, Major Kill, who really loves his golden boys, and has a wicked sense of humour, and if you don't know who he is yet, how? Anyway, this week's combat patrol is the Adeptus Custodes, the pinnacle of genetic enhancement, Major Kill's and also Henry Cavill's favourite faction, and there seems to be a lot of talk about them recently, as they've had a new codex drop, which apparently has some very minor teeny tiny changes to the lore in it, that apparently just a few people are getting really upset over. I mean, I have no idea what these changes are, but I doubt it's anything massive. But for now, a brief recap of the lore, what's in the box, what to do with it, and what to add next. So before I dive into the lore recap of the Custodes, I want to read you an excerpt from the book Master of Mankind by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, as this alone will give you a good insight into the thought process of a custodian. Constantin, she repeated slowly. Her schooling in Old English mythology had been extensive, and she often harkened back to old tales and legends in her speeches, all the better to inspire the teeming masses of godless, helpless dregs who served her. Now the minister found herself smiling, no matter that her son was to be stolen away to a fate of a genetic torment, no matter that her own death was mere breaths away. She smiled a madwoman's smile, all teeth and wide eyes. I am to be killed by a man with an ancient king's name.
So it seems. If you have any last words, I will ensure they reach the Emperor's ears.
Kojazu's lip curled. Emperor. How I loathe that title.
He is the ruler of this world, and the master of our species. No title is more appropriate.
She bared her teeth in an expression too ugly and defiant to be a smile. Have you ever considered just what kind of creature you serve?
Yes.
The dark eyes stared on.
Have you?
The Master of Mankind. She shook her head, feeling the welcome flare of righteousness. He isn't even human.
Minister Zoo.
The Golden Warrior made a warning of her name, one she didn't heed. Does he even breathe? She demanded. Tell me that, Custodian. Have you ever heard him breathe? He is a relic left over from the Dark Age, a weapon left out of its box, now running rampant. Valdor blinked once, the first time she'd seen him blink so far. That rare human movement was unnerving. To her it felt false, like it had no right taking place upon his statuesque features.
Terror,
he said,
is a thirsty world.
She knew, then, with those words, she knew which of her many crimes she was to die for. The one she'd least expected. A laugh, queasy and unwanted, tore herself from her throat. Oh, you vile slave, she said, unable to keep the sick grin from her face.
Other worlds suffer a similar thirst.
The Golden Killer's eyes had glassed over with an inhuman serenity, made all the more uncomfortable by the living intelligence shining behind it.
Yet none of them hold the war-scarred, irradiated honour of being mankind's cradle. This world is the beating heart of the Great Crusade, Minister. Do you know how many men, women and children now make their slow way back here, to humanity's first home? Do you know how many pilgrims wish only to see the ancestral earth with their own eyes? How many refugees flee their flawed and failing worlds, now the veil of old night has been lifted? Already it is said that unsettled land on the throne world is the most valuable commodity in our nascent imperium. But this is not so, is it? One resource is far more precious.
She clutched the auto pistol tighter as he spoke, breathing slowly and calmly. Even knowing she was to die, even knowing she had no hope of drawing the weapon, the body was reluctant to surrender its survival instincts. Instinct demanded she fight to live. What I did, she said, I did for my people.
And now you will die for what you did for them,
he said without malice. For that alone?
For that alone. Your other treacheries are meaningless in my master's eyes. Your cleansing programs, your trade in forbidden flesh, the army of G-work detritus you have sequestered in the bunkers beneath the Germanic steppes. The prospect of your rebellion was never a threat to the Pax Imperialis. Your crimes of apostasy are nothing. You are dying for the sin of your harvester machines drinking the last ocean.
For stealing water? She felt like laughing again, and the sensation wasn't a pleasant one. The laughter was creeping up through her blood, seeking a release. All of this because I stole water?
It pleases me that you understand the situation, Minister Zoo.
He inclined his head once more, with a curious courtesy, and another subtle purr of machine muscles.
Goodbye.
Wait, what of my son? What is his fate?
You will be armed with silver, armoured in gold, and burdened by the weight of ultimate expectation.
Zoo swallowed, feeling her skin crawl anew. Will he live? The golden statue nodded.
If he is strong.
In that moment, her tremble subsided. The fear bled away, leaving only naked defiance somewhere between relief and hope. She closed her eyes. Then he will live, she said. There was a bang, throaty and concussive, as she was falling, drowning, choking in thunder. There was pressure and heat and grey, grey, grey. And then mercifully, there was nothing. Nothing, at least, for her. You see, I decided to add that because I really love this quote, and besides, I can get behind the whole theory that Emperor Chris is just a weapon, a genetically engineered superhuman from the Golden Age or Dark Age of technology that tricked the Chaos Gods into making him the most powerful psyker the human race has ever seen. Even though according to this theory he isn't actually human, he is a construct. The reason I can is because the main three things Emperor Chris is famous for is being a shit dad, his genetic experiments, and spoiling the fuck out of his firstborn legion of grandsons. So, in no particular order, well it is actually, I'm just trying to pretend it's not as I segue into the next part of my video, but basically spoil the Dark Angels fucking rotten compared to the other legions, and they have vaults upon vaults of shit that would tick every box of what you can't use in the Geneva Convention, and even has some that they haven't thought of yet. But quoting the fat electrician, it's not a war crime the first time, but at this point the Dark Angels are not afraid of pulling out a MacGuffin or six to win a battle or two. An argument can be made that Emperor Chris wasn't a total shit dad, as he knew the Chaos Gods were going to take half the Primarchs away and force the civil war. That was the Horus Heresy to happen. So he kind of manipulated which ones it would be. As for all his genetic engineering, that being the form of both enhancement or creation from the ground up, this fits with him being the weapon from the Dark Age of technology, left out of its box and left to run free. Imagine the perfect human being that was akin to Superman being made and given one command: save humanity. He then used his genius level intellect to figure out it can be done, but he needs more weapons, i.e. psyker abilities and a massive army. He also figured out that right now is not the time for that, so he kept his head down until the time was right. You see, my theory of adding on to this is that Emperor Chris is so into genetic experiments, not because he's trying to make an army to fight for him, because he is trying to make more of himself. He realised he couldn't actually do that, so started making the world's most kick-ass army instead. Now, the Custodes were first, but fuck me, they were expensive on resources. Now, when you're playing an RTS game on a big campaign, and you have all the tech levels unlocked from turn 1, you don't waste all your resources on the end game tech and then turtle for a few rounds. But Emperor Chris did just that. Then he smashed the zone next door, took all their resources, and then made the Thunder Warriors, that although are powerful, more powerful than Astartes, but are nowhere near Custodes levels of power, and the Thunder Warriors are also batshit crazy, which makes them really fucking cheap on resources. So he mass-produced Thunder Warriors and used them to Zerg rush all the remaining zones in Terra. Once Emperor Chris was close to having all of Terra under his command, he started building tech level 5 units in secret. These were the Primarchs, and unlike the Custodes and Thunder Warriors, these were genetic creations from the ground up. So going back to that excerpt, I can get behind that being true about Emperor Chris being a weapon let out of his box, and he is into his genetic experimentation and construction, as he is trying to make more of himself because he knows only beings as powerful as him can protect and serve humanity and defeat the threat of Chaos and the Xenos. As an interesting theory as it is, however, I have to make it very clear it is a combination of speculation and my own headcanon and is not true at all. Emperor Chris has been around from roughly the time man made Stonehenge, but it's a theory I really do like. Anyway, out of all the genetically enhanced creations of the Imperium of Mankind, the Custodes are by far the most resource intensive, but then they're not just Emperor Chris's honour guards. They were also meant to be his friends. They were given such a high level of intelligence and knowledge so they can hold a conversation with Emperor Chris while playing Paradox, Billiards, Vostroy and Roulette 4th dimensional hypercube chess strip poker. Damn, I really do miss if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device, Vince. So, the Custodes are Emperor Chris as Honor Guard. Now, an Honor Guard is very different to a Bodyguard, in the fact that they have more shit to do in their job description. The problem with the phrase Honor Guard, it is often used to describe a ceremonial guard, whose job is to just look impressive and meet visiting dignitaries, but in reality they ain't guarding fuck all. Look at the Queen's Guard, sorry, it's now the King's Guard, at Buckingham Palace. The ceremonial, the real bodyguarding, is done by the branch of the GCHQ, namely the Royal Protection Team. An Honour Guard acts as a ceremonial guard when required, bodyguards at all times, and also as messengers, executioners, assassins, confidants, and fetch the fucking pizzas bitch when required. The Custodes were always part of the law that existed, but were not a playable faction. Instead, they spent the last 10,000 years sulking in the Emperor's palace since Horus gave Emperor Chris an extreme body makeover with his power claw, and they were not present to stop it. Turns out that wasn't entirely true when they dropped as a faction, as they do occasionally leave the palace to kick some ass, but very rarely. It was also mentioned in a few sources that it was the noble sons of Terra that were recruited to become Custodes, just like in the excerpt I read. Turns out this isn't fucking true anymore, and quite frankly, I don't want to talk about it just yet, because I've heard two different reasons as to why they were added, and it's possible that both, or neither, are true. So I'm going to wait and see if more information comes out, as I'm not here to fan the flames of speculation and possible unjust or justified rage, unlike some certain other channels. Besides, I've had my trial by fire on this topic when I covered female Primaris a few videos back, so I'm going to wait and see how this plays out. Right, this is getting a bit long already, so let's move on to the contents of the box. So you get a massive 14 models. Yep, that's it, just 14. But that should give you an idea of how powerful the Custodes actually are. In the lore, each one is a literal one-man army, and this pretty much translates well to the tabletop. So specifically, you get 1 Blade Champion, 3 Allora's Custodians, 5 Custodian Guard, and 5 Custodian Wardens. Now I'm not going to break down each unit like I normally do, as they all pretty much play the same. The Blade Champion has no ranged abilities at all whatsoever, but each of the other units have 2 attacks at 24-inch range with an average strength 4, so not too shabby but nothing to get excited about. You're not going to be mowing down the enemy with impressive range firepower. What you are going to do is tank pretty much everything the enemy throws at you, while you get in their faces and then cut the motherfuckers up and teach them not to be stupid enough to go up against the Custodes. Every single one of these units are absolute fucking tanks, and absolute fucking beasts in melee combat. They all get a minimum of 5 attacks each in melee and at least a strength 6, some even going as high as strength 9, so there's not a lot in a combat patrol level force they can't fuck up easily. On top of that, every unit has at least 3 wounds, which that alone is fucking obscene. But then they all have a 2+ standard save and a 4+ invulnerable save. That's Terminator level armor. These motherfuckers not only hit like a runaway freight train, they're fucking built like one too. So, and I've said it before, don't fuck around and get them into melee as quick as you can. Just looking at their stats feels like I'm cheating, let alone putting these overpowered motherfuckers on the tabletop. So what to add next? Well, herein lies the problem with the Custodes infantry and character models. You don't get much to choose from. It's basically a choice between expensive points-wise powerful melee units or some slightly more expensive and slightly more powerful melee units that look slightly fucking different. In total, it's 5 slightly different melee units, including a Terminator unit, but seeing as they already have Terminator levels of armour, that unit seems pretty pointless to me. On top of that, you only have 4 vehicles to choose from: a melee dreadnought, a ranged heavy dreadnought, a Rhino APC, and the venerable Land Raider, which of course you want the Land Raider because, and say it with me folks,
Land Raiders are fucking cool.
They also have some jet bikes that are, ironically enough, better in melee, and some troops with jetpacks to get them into the fight quicker. Now, although the Custodes are really fucking powerful against standard units, especially the stuff you get in a combat patrol box, they are also really expensive points-wise, making them a very small army to play, and also one of the cheapest to collect. And as tough as they are still killable, and losing even a single unit puts a massive dent in the amount of damage you can deal each turn. Custodes always start out well at your local games club, but soon as your opponents start to figure out to bring lots of big guns, they start to drop, and quickly. For example, weapons with the devastating wounds keyword ignore all armor saves on a damage roll of 6, This includes invulnerable saves, and weapons with the keyword mortal wounds have any excess damage carry over to other units. As soon as your opponent starts bringing lots of these weapons to the table, your units are going to start dropping, and you're going to start struggling to survive all 5 rounds, let alone lasting long enough to gain a technical victory. And due to the lack of options in your unit choices, not much you can do about it. They are paper, rock, scissors, and as soon as your opponent figures out paper beats rock, you have fuck all choices in the codex to turn them into scissors, unlike every other faction out there. Although considered as the most powerful faction, they are also the faction with the least amount of options and playstyle. As a result, for a starting player, I would not recommend the Custodes as a starting faction. While cheap to collect, you are limited to a single playstyle, and just a few choices in models, and if it's not a playstyle you enjoy, or your enemy has already figured out how to counter them, you're not going to have a fun time. And Warhammer 40,000 is a game, so it's supposed to be fun. Anyway, there we have it. Firstly, if you made it this far, thank you. And if you're planning on getting this Combat Patrol box or any other gaming gear, please check out my link for Firestorm Games. If you laughed or learned anything, please hit the subscribe button, and if you already are subscribed, then share or show this video with someone who could do with some noob-splaining in their life. Meanwhile, I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye, folks.